fired several inspectors general without giving Congress the 30-day legally required notification that they were being fired. I think only 2 were left at DHS and the DOJ. And then yesterday we saw several prosecutors, I believe 12, fired from the Justice Department who worked on the investigations into the president. As you know, they are career prosecutors, therefore they are afforded civil service protections. How is the administration deciding which laws to follow and which ones to ignore?
So it is the belief of this White House and the White House counsel's office that the president was within his executive authority to do that. He is the executive of the executive branch, and therefore he has the power to fire anyone within the executive branch that he wishes to. There's also a case that went before the Supreme Court in 2020, Scala Law LLC versus the Customs.
What happens when two strong personalities with opposing views collide on live television? The result is a tense, high-stakes confrontation that captures national attention and ignites debates long after the cameras stop rolling. That's exactly what unfolded when Karoline Leavitt and Joy Behar finally had their much-anticipated face-off. The exchange wasn't just a heated discussion, it was a political clash that exposed deep-seated divisions in mainstream media. But how did it reach this point? What led to this viral moment? And most importantly, how did the internet react? Once the dust settled, stay tuned as we break down the build-up, the confrontation, and the fallout from one of the most talked-about debates in recent television history. For weeks, The View had been subtly and, at times, openly challenging Karoline Leavitt's credibility. The discussion about her role in politics became a recurring topic on the show, with Joy Behar and her co-hosts questioning not just her viewpoints, but also her competence and legitimacy in political discourse, from casual sarcastic remarks to more direct dismissals of her stance. The show's panel created an atmosphere that made it clear they didn't take Leavitt seriously. Joy Behar led the charge, frequently dismissing Leavitt as inexperienced and implying she wasn't qualified to contribute to serious discussions. Sunny Hostin reinforced the skepticism, suggesting that Leavitt's political success was more about privilege than actual merit. Whoopi Goldberg took a less direct but equally dismissive approach, resorting to dramatic eye rolls and audible sighs whenever Leavitt's name was mentioned. It wasn't just disagreement, it was a pattern of subtle and overt belittling, setting the stage for an eventual on-air confrontation. The buildup of tension was impossible to ignore. Viewers were waiting for the moment when Leavitt would finally have the chance to respond, and when that moment arrived, she made sure it was worth the wait. When Karoline Leavitt finally appeared on The View, she wasn't there to play defense, she was ready for battle. She knew exactly what kind of reception to expect, and instead of falling into the panel's usual traps, she flipped the conversation on its head. Rather than getting flustered or allowing herself to be talked over, she took control. Turning the show's own rhetoric against them, she pointed out a glaring contradiction. It's interesting how the same people who talk about lifting up women are the first to tear them down when they don't fit their narrative. With that one statement, she exposed the hypocrisy that had been fueling the panel's treatment of her all along. The reaction in the room was instant. The audience could feel the shift in power. For the first time, Joy Behar, usually unshakable in her confrontations, found herself struggling to counter Leavitt's words, and this was just the beginning. Seeing Joy Behar struggling to regain control, Whoopi Goldberg stepped in, hoping to turn the tide. She attempted to challenge Karoline Leavitt, using her signature mix of sarcasm and forceful delivery to reframe the debate, but there was a problem. Her response lacked impact. She raised her voice, exaggerated her gestures, and delivered what was clearly meant to be a powerful comeback. However, instead of landing with the force she intended, it fell flat. The studio audience, usually quick to applaud The View's hosts, offered only scattered applause. Certain sections of the crowd remained noticeably silent, an unusual occurrence for a show that thrives on audience engagement. It was a clear sign. Whoopi's argument hadn't convinced everyone. Viewers watching live picked up on it immediately. Within minutes, Twitter, X, was flooded with reactions. One user tweeted, "Whoopi just tried to come at Karoline Leavitt, but it was like bringing a water gun to a wildfire. That was painful to watch." Another commented, "That awkward pause when Whoopi thought she got to Karoline, but the audience wasn't buying it. That says everything." As the tension in the studio became more visible, Joy Behar realized that the debate was slipping out of her control. Determined to reclaim dominance, she launched a final, desperate attack. Instead of countering Leavitt's points with logic, Behar resorted to personal insults. She called Leavitt a useful idiot, a Cold War-era term suggesting she was being manipulated by others. She compared her to Donald Trump, implying that she was merely following a script rather than speaking her own mind. She accused her of being spineless. claiming that she wouldn't be able to handle tough questions outside of conservative spaces. It was a predictable strategy, but also a revealing one. Rather than debating on policy or substance, Behar had shifted to character attacks, a move that often signals a lack of stronger arguments, but once again, Leavitt was ready. With measured confidence, she turned Behar's insults right back on her. It's funny that the people who spend their careers avoiding tough questions are suddenly concerned about my ability to handle them. It was a devastating response, not because it was loud, but because it was calm, precise, and undeniably true. The moment she said it, the energy in the room shifted. Even those who had been skeptical of her before couldn't ignore how effortlessly she dismantled Behar's entire argument. As soon as the episode aired, social media exploded. Some praised Leavitt for standing her ground, calling out the bias of the Views panel, and refusing to be intimidated. Others criticized the show itself, arguing that it had invited a conservative guest only to attack her, rather than engage in a meaningful, balanced discussion. Clips of the exchange went viral within hours. Some focused on Behar's visible frustration when her attacks didn't land. Others highlighted Whoopi's awkward attempt to recover, only to be met with silence from the audience. Some even pointed out Sunny Hostin's quiet retreat, as if realizing the debate was not going in their favor. One viral comment summed it up perfectly: The View set the trap, but Karoline Leavitt flipped the whole thing on them. They weren't ready for that. Another simply stated, this wasn't just a debate, this was an exposure of media bias in real time. As the clips continued circulating, it became clear that this exchange wasn't going to be forgotten anytime soon. The View got exactly what they asked for, a guest who came prepared. And they couldn't handle it. This wasn't just another television debate, it was a turning point in how audiences perceive mainstream political discussions. It exposed a frustration many viewers have felt for years: the idea that platforms like The View are more focused on controlling narratives than facilitating open, balanced discussions. Karoline Leavitt didn't just defend herself, she flipped the entire conversation. What was intended to be an ambush became a critique of the very hosts who had invited her. The real question now is, will this confrontation force The View to reconsider how they engage with conservative voices, or will they double down, hoping the next guest won't be as prepared and composed as Leavitt? The fallout from this exchange didn't stop on television, it reverberated across news outlets and social media. And as expected, the media's response was divided. In the aftermath of the debate, mainstream media outlets scrambled to frame the conversation in a way that fit their existing biases. Some downplayed the confrontation, while others painted Leavitt's composure as arrogance or an avoidance of real debate. Left-leaning media claimed Leavitt had used scripted conservative talking points instead of engaging in meaningful discussion. Conservative media, on the other hand, praised her ability to stay calm and collected under pressure, calling her a force to be reckoned with. Independent commentators took a different approach, highlighting the irony of the Views panel accusing someone else of lacking substance, while failing to present strong counterarguments themselves. One headline summed up the situation perfectly: The View tried to gang up on Karoline Leavitt, and it backfired spectacularly. It became clear that public perception wasn't aligning with the media's attempt to control the narrative. This wasn't just about political differences, it was about how the media treats conservative voices versus liberal ones. But while legacy media worked overtime to spin the event, social media had already taken over the discussion, and it told a completely different story. If mainstream media was struggling to shape the story, social media was doing the exact opposite. Twitter X exploded with clips of Leavitt's sharpest moments. Hashtags like #Leavitt vs The View and #JoyBeharMeltdown began trending almost immediately. YouTube reaction videos started dissecting the debate, breaking down how Behar's arguments crumbled under scrutiny. Memes flooded social media, mocking Whoopi's over-the-top reactions and Behar's visible frustration. One viral post captured the reaction perfectly: The View brought Karoline on thinking they could corner her. Instead, she ran circles around them, and they weren't ready. Another user commented, this wasn't just a debate, it was an exposure of media bias in real time. Many pointed out how The View's usual formula, talking over their guests and dismissing their points, failed miserably this time. The internet wasn't buying the usual tactics. The overwhelming response showed that viewers recognized exactly what had happened, and it wasn't what The View had intended. This wasn't just about Karoline Leavitt, it was about the future of political discourse in media. Will mainstream platforms like The View rethink how they handle opposing voices? Or will they continue avoiding real debates, afraid of giving conservatives a fair chance to make their case? What's certain is that this debate struck a chord with audiences. It exposed media bias in a way that was impossible to ignore. The fallout isn't over, and if anything, it may have just changed the way political figures approach mainstream media platforms forever. One viral tweet summed up the moment perfectly: The View just got a taste of what happens when you invite someone who actually knows what they're talking about. Another sarcastic post took aim at Whoopi Goldberg's failed rebuttal. Whoopi was so confident until she realized she had no actual argument. The silence was loud. The overwhelming reaction across social media made one thing clear: viewers weren't falling for the usual tactics. The scripted applause, the coordinated interruptions, and the attempts to belittle opposing voices had all been exposed in real time. This time, the audience saw through it.as criticism mounted. The View's producers and hosts scrambled to regain control, realizing that the exchange had gone viral for all the wrong reasons. The View wasted no time in trying to reshape the narrative. Point 1. Trying to rewrite the narrative. The very next day, Joy Behar and her co-hosts attempted to downplay the entire debate. Behar dismissed Leavitt as just another right-wing talking head, implying that her responses were nothing more than political theater rather than a substantive debate. She went on to claim that Leavitt wasn't actually engaging in a real conversation but was instead playing to an audience. But this attempt only backfired further. Critics were quick to call out the hypocrisy in Behar's comments. After all, isn't The View itself a show that thrives on political theater? Isn't The View's entire format built around playing to an audience? If Leavitt had been performing, then so had they, for years. The attempt to discredit her only reinforced the exact double standard that the debate had exposed in the first place. As the backlash intensified, rumors began to circulate that The View's producers were reconsidering their approach to hosting outspoken conservative guests. Some reports suggested that the show may hesitate to invite another strong conservative voice anytime soon, fearing another public embarrassment like this one. And honestly, this wouldn't be surprising. The last thing the View's panel wants is another situation where a guest flips the conversation on them. The show functions best when it can control the discussion, selectively editing, interrupting, or overpowering dissenting voices. But when someone comes prepared, remains composed, and challenges their talking points with logic, the usual formula crumbles. This situation highlighted a deeper issue in modern media, one that goes far beyond just this one debate. What happened on The View wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a revealing moment about how mainstream media treats conservative viewpoints. The View and similar shows often claim to encourage diverse opinions, but in reality, they only welcome conservative guests when they can control the conversation. The moment a guest challenges their narrative with facts, the response is rarely a debate. It's personal attacks, deflection, or outright dismissal. This isn't about politics, it's about control. And for the first time in a long time, viewers saw through it in real time. This debate exposed the weakness of one-sided media panels and showed that many viewers are no longer blindly accepting the way mainstream outlets present these discussions, which raises an important question: do shows like The View actually want political discussions, or do they just want an echo chamber? The answer, for many, is becoming more obvious by the day. At the end of the day, The View's panel may have controlled the studio audience, but Karoline Leavitt won the real debate. She stood her ground, she challenged their hypocrisy, she remained composed, while her opponents resorted to emotional outbursts. This wasn't just a political debate, it was a turning point. Regardless of where you stand politically, one thing is undeniable: Leavitt exposed the bias in mainstream political discussions. And people noticed. And as for The View? Well, let's just say they might think twice before inviting another well-prepared conservative guest anytime soon. Well, let's just say they might think twice before inviting another strong conservative voice onto their stage anytime soon. This debate wasn't just a clash of opinions, it was a wake-up call for mainstream platforms that rely on controlling the conversation rather than encouraging real dialogue. Karoline Leavitt didn't just hold her ground, she flipped the script, exposing the bias, contradictions, and weaknesses in The View's approach to dissenting voices. Whether you agree or disagree with her politics, there's no denying that she dominated the debate while her opponents struggled to regain control. That wraps up our deep dive into this viral showdown. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and drop a comment. Right arrow, who do you think won this debate? Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. Rocket fire.